Hello, everyone. This is a re-release of my interview with artist Teresa James that I did when I was living in Chicago. She's a really sweet person. She's a very talented artist, and this is a nice interview. She did a good job. When I was living in Chicago, I worked at a gallery called the Hofheimer Gallery. I was the gallery manager. It was probably one of the funnest jobs I have ever had. And we would have new artists, new shows every month. And oftentimes the artists would come on my podcast. And that was what the situation was here. This guest was having a show, a solo show, I think, and at the Hofheimer Gallery, and she agreed to come on and talk to me, and then we were able to use this episode to promote the show. But a super nice person and very talented artist, so please enjoy my conversation with artist Teresa James.
I know we spoke previously about this, a world that we can't see combined with a world that we exist in and see every day, and that's one of the ideas of the show. Can you tell me about that idea of, I don't know if I'd call it spirituality, but this idea that there is something else that's going around us all the time that we can't hear and see, but that is here?
Yeah, I think all of that comes from my Catholic faith and my spirituality. In that way, I was raised Catholic, and I'm still a practicing Catholic today. And it's always a source of inspiration to me. And I've always felt like somehow aware or connected to talking about the afterlife and where we go after we're here. And I was always so interested in it. And it visually in my mind always gave me pictures of things that I wanted to create.
You had mentioned that your Catholic faith is a source of inspiration. Would you say that you grew up in a strict Catholic home?
I would say that I grew up in a devout Catholic home, but my parents were such loving, sweet people. My dad is an artist and my mom was really super creative, and we always felt like we could go to our parents and talk about whatever. So I guess in a way you could say strict, but it wasn't like unkind, and it wasn't overpowering me. Like I felt like I was being, forced to do what they said. It wasn't like, now you need to do this, or, this is going to happen. And we always were able to talk about things, and we went to church every Sunday, and we practiced, or we tried to practice our faith. And they just always taught us as kids to, be kind to other people, do your best in the world. They were always very supportive, and so it was a very loving home. They were always available. My dad worked so hard to support the family, and my mom was always there taking care of us kids when we needed her. So they really did their job.
Now, you grew up in a very small town in Michigan.
Yes.
I think you had said it was like 4,000 people.
Actually, right now, I think it's between 500 and 600 people.
Looking back on it, do you feel like you were removed from culture a bit? You obviously had television and radio and all that, but you weren't close by to a big city.
Right.
Do you feel like you were somewhat cut off at all?
Yeah, to some degree. I think also we lived in a town, Port Sanilac, which is right on Lake Huron, and it would have been, it's 2 hours north of Detroit. We definitely didn't grow up knowing a lot of certain things that you might know about going to the city. But I think once I left Port Sanilac, I moved to California for a while. And I just remember this story. I didn't really even know what sushi was. And then when I moved out there, I was like, what's sushi? And then my friends told me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, So there are those little things like that where maybe I wasn't experienced in the world. And that's kind of why I got to a point where I knew I wanted to go and get out. I wanted to leave
Yeah.
and, explore art and just meet people and to kind of get outside and see what else is out there.
So was that something where I need to get the heck out of here, or was it more of a, I'm kind of curious to see what's out there?
I think it was like maybe sort of in between, because I enjoyed my life there and I had such great friends and I wanted to be a fashion designer. And so I knew I couldn't do it there. So it was kind of like, yeah, I can't wait to just get out and, do what I need to do.
You had mentioned your dad was an artist.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? Can you tell me a little bit about him in terms of like where he grew up and what he did for art? Because I'm curious about someone who lives in a male who lives in a small town like that, who's an artist. How do you get to that?
When my dad was a young boy, his uncle was in the war and would send him little sketches of planes and things. And my dad really liked that. And so he kind of got him into drawing as a kid. And then as he grew up, he always kind of pursued that art on the side. So in Port Sand Lake, where I grew up, that's where my grandparents lived. That's where my dad grew up and my mom grew up. So everybody like knew each other. It was kind of like this, cozy, quaint little town. And so my dad, as he got older, he actually went to Center for Creative Studies. So he went to Center Creative Studies. He painted and drew. They kind of met while she was working in the TV shop in this little town. He would go stop in there and he saw that she had some drawings laid out, and then they got talking. And so then they kind of met and I think liked each other, and they ended up getting married. So while they were married, that's kind of when art school, he kind of quit going to art school after that. But he pursued his work. He still painted and, would have art shows like just in the town or nearby. But he always continued to pursue that. I remember too, my mom telling me stories when they got married. They were kind of like these artsy people of the town, and they were kind of like known as the beatniks of the town because they wore the black and were kind of a little bit like different than everybody else. I always remember my dad making art. He always had a little studio, and he worked really hard, like having his own businesses and stuff, but he always found time to make his own art. Like even if it was a long day and he was tired, he always had time for us kids when he came home, and he always found a moment or two to like keep painting.
That's great. Now, did your siblings, did any of them pursue artistic avenues?
My sister and all my other two brothers, everybody's all really in creative type jobs. My youngest brother, Matt, he is an artist too. He shows in Chicago and New York, and he does drawing as well. And then my brother Mike, he has his own techno band. It was called Deep Chord, and then he kind of went off into his own thing as Mike Schomer. So he's kind of known more like in Europe and Germany as with his techno music. And then my sister was always really creative in so many different ways, and she writes a lot. She's constantly writing, and she's got great stories, but she also is spending a lot of her time helping elderly and works with elderly people. But everybody's all really creative.
Yeah, I think that's a great story. What a gift that your parents gave you to essentially give you the license to be creative, because I talk to people obviously all the time on my podcast. Everyone starts out as a kid being creative and there's art class, but then at some point it breaks off, and some kids, a very small percentage of kids, stick with that, but most kids do not. And they pursue something that either they're not going to get made fun of, particularly with boys. Being an artsy boy isn't always, I was subject to a bit of ridicule, or something that's more guaranteed a career, all the reasons. And it's wonderful that there was sort of this foundation, it sounds like, that was very solid, that allowed you to see that as a value a valued way to pursue your life.
I always remember my father and mother being very positive, where it's like, if you want to pursue this, then that's great. They never forced us, to be in the arts or to go to college. My dad told me that his father always told him that it didn't really matter what he did, but as long as he did it well and took pride in his work and did his very best and always treat others with kindness. So that was kind of the base.
So family, faith, art, it sounds like these are foundations of you. Is there anything else that's a big part of you that we need to talk about?
Those are the big ones, but I guess you could throw in like my animals. I've always been an animal lover. And I have three.
Did you have a lot of pets as a kid?
Well, we had cats, and then we also had a beagle named Jake, and then he died, and then we got Jack, who was Jake's son. But when I was younger, Jake and Jack were a little too jumpy on me, so I was like, so I had all my kitty cats, and I had one cat in particular, Thomasina. She was a stray, and I have home movies of me where I would just kind of lean over, and she would jump up on my back, and I'd walk around with her and she'd just ride on my back. So I kind of had like little stray cats here and there. And then we, of course, had Mama Kitty. And she was like the old, veteran cat of our whole, cat lives that we've had. And then, but, it was kind of funny. I was always bringing home like a bird or a mouse or something that was like injured, and I wanted to make it better. So I have a lot of photos of me when I was younger with an animal in my bed, and like just holding all these different little animals that I'd find. And then I do remember my mom saved this letter I wrote to my parents, and it was pleading with them that I wanted a fancy dog. And I just was like, please, please, all I want is a fancy dog. I'll do anything. Because, we had the beagles, and I'm like, I don't know what I thought a fancy dog was, like a collie or something. But so she saved the letter, and I just was like, oh, tears. I'm in tears, tears, tears. Please let me have a fancy dog.
When a child is an animal lover, like you were, like what do you think that says about them as a person? Because obviously the traits that we have as a child, a lot of them are just hardwired, and they either we keep them or they turn into something else as an adult. If a child is a animal lover, what do you think that means about them as a person?
I think it means that maybe they're a little more compassionate person, having more compassion in the world. I mean, not to say that, if you don't love animals, you don't. But yeah, I think it's like something special, because I feel like animals are so calming, and you can learn so much just from being around an animal and just being in a relaxed state. If you're stressed out, I feel like you can talk to a dog and just, doesn't matter. You can just let them know what's on your mind, and they're always right there.
Well, I think it's wonderful that you have the ability to take all of these things that are meaningful to you, animals, your faith, and you have this artistic way to express it. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel blessed because, it's sometimes hard for people to know, like, what am I supposed to do in this world? What is my purpose? Because we all have a purpose. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and finding out what that is and what our mission in life is while we're here. And I think it really boils down to helping others in whatever you do, whether it be art or if you are working like in the medical field. And, because sometimes I think, well, I want to do more for other people. How can I really help people? Is making art enough? And I feel like, yeah, it is what I'm meant to be doing. And of course, I do want to help, and I try to do other things outside of that as well. But a lot of people can feel lost and like, what is my purpose? What is this thing that I'm meant to do in life? And they can go from different jobs and trying out things. So I felt very fortunate that I kind of knew at a young age, even though fashion design was like the first love, it changed over time.
So do you believe that everybody has a purpose?
Yeah, I do. I think we do. I don't know what it is for everybody, but we have to find out what that is. I feel like everybody's unique and everybody is a special person. And, I don't like to lump people all in one big group, like as just numbers. Like when you encounter someone, they are important. And it doesn't matter if it's somebody who's maybe living on the streets, or maybe it's somebody who's, rich, high-powered, so whoever, and maybe somebody you don't really get along with or whatever, but everybody is important.
So if someone is listening to this and they haven't found their purpose, do you have any suggestions, ideas, guidance for how they can get that answer?
Yes. Well, I mean, for me, it's all about prayer, meditation, if that, prayer is meditation. So I guess for advice for in general, anybody, I would say just take some quiet time to like either pray, meditate, or just maybe just get out in nature. That can help you think about things, and then maybe write things down and list your qualities those good qualities that you might have, because everybody has, like I said, strengths and weaknesses. So what are your interests and what are your strengths? Because I feel like, while you're here, we need to be doing things to help each other. It's not about just kind of floating around and, watching Netflix all day and, just finding purpose. And I feel like when you are, if you're lost, I feel like the best medicine for that is just go out and try to do something nice for someone. Find a way where you can help somebody else out. And maybe that would like open a door or open your mind to something that you never thought you would do. I would say don't get stuck in a plan. Now for me, I did become, I continued making art, but like I said, I wanted to be a fashion designer, and that was it. I was like, I'm going to do that and nothing's going to stop me. But I was open when I, had this kind of realization, like, I don't think that's where I'm meant to be. And I was open to that and open to trying something new. You have to follow your heart and your dream of what you think that might be. And it could be something that you never thought. And a lot of times it is, in the journey of life, you could be doing something for years and years and years, and then, things change and you thought, well, I never thought I would be here. So I think there is that you don't want to give up, but also knowing when maybe it's time to try another way.
So one thing that you mentioned was other people on the planet having a dramatic impact on you and the direction of your life, your career. And you mentioned Tony Fitzpatrick. Can you tell me a little bit about that relationship and how that impacted you?
So I moved to Chicago, and my plan was to go to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, SAIC. So I'm enrolled in school, and at the same time, I always had to, my parents could never afford to put me through college and that, so I always had to have jobs and pay for my school and get loans, and they would help me as much as they could. So here I am in Chicago and desperate for work, and my friend was trying to get me in this coffee shop where she was working. And I had to just kind of take whatever I could on the side while I was going to school until I could find something a little bit better. But so anyway, she gets me this job at the coffee shop, and it just so happens that Tony Fitzpatrick, it's the coffee shop that he would go to every day. He is a Chicago-based artist who is a printmaker, and he does these beautiful bird collages. He's known all over the world. Yeah, and he's also like a man of many talents. He's been on radio. He's an actor. He's a writer, a poet. And so I was so fortunate enough to bump into Tony in my life. And here we are at the coffee shop. And I just started going to art school. And I would get into conversations. And he had told me that he was opening up a print shop. And he needed somebody to work for him. And I'm like, oh, I would love to. It just so turns out that I'm taking printmaking classes right now at SAIC. So he's like, would you want to come work for me when I open up? And I'm like, yeah. So we stayed in touch, because he would come in daily. And I kept asking him, like, hey, you ready to get to, hire me yet? And so it finally happened. And that was about 1990, 91. And so I started working for Tony. And I mean, what an education there. It was like, here I am working for this artist who can teach me so much. When you're working with someone in a small business, you become kind of like a family too. And so I knew his family, his wife and kids, and his, parents and his siblings, all wonderful people. And Tony always included me, like would he get collectors to look at my work? He'd put me in shows. I'd, with him. And it's like he didn't have to do any of that, but he was always so generous. And I learned so much just watching him, doing the business end of it. And, so it was not only just his artwork, but it was just the whole package. And so I ended up working with him for 13 years. I met my husband through Tony. So Tony's dad knew my husband's dad. And then my husband, Bill, he is really into art, and he was always wanting to collect art as a young person. And Tony Fitzpatrick was one of the first artists that he started collecting. And so my husband's dad kind of made a connection so that Bill, my husband, could meet Tony and see his work. And so he started buying Tony's work, and he ended up my husband bought some of my work through the studio. So when my husband, Bill, bought my work, when he wasn't my husband at the time, I was like, oh, great. And this guy, he paid me, and this is awesome. And then we joke later that after I got married that I got the sale, and then I got the guy, and then I got the work back.
So Teresa, thank you so much for talking with me today. I did see one of your animals made an appearance in the back while you were talking. It looked like it was a German Shepherd.
Oh, okay, my Shiloh Shepherd, and then I have a giant Newfoundland somewhere, and then I have a little itty bitty baby.
Well, thanks for talking to me. Where can people go to learn more about you and your artwork?
Well, I show at Hofheimer Gallery in Chicago, so you could go to their website, and I have a website, teresajamesart.com, and anybody could call the studio and talk to me. I'm really easy to talk to and approachable, and if anybody, I know right now with COVID, but people are always welcome to come by my studio and look around, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody. I love sharing what I do. So, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again for talking to me. Introduction music was Breaking Over Branches by Fog Lake. My name is Ricky McGuckran, and you have been listening to Eager to Know, the podcast. If you haven't already, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join me next week for another Eager to Know podcast.